Hi, welcome to day 18 on Learn, Code and Create. Today I would like to introduce to you a simple principle of arrays and objects in JavaScript. So far we've gone through a certain number of data types in JavaScript. So we explored um, that we have numbers. We said we had numbers in JavaScript. We have array strings. We have no values and so on. So these basic data types, we've seen them a bit. So today in this lesson, I would like to explore a particular type, a particular set of types in JavaScript called arrays and objects. So we'll begin with the concept of arrays. So idea is simple. Let me use this basic analogy to explain what arrays are. And we'll begin with a simple idea that we have areas in our houses, for example. So in your house, you might have what we call an area. So you can have, for example, the sitting room area. You can have the kitchen area. So let me take the kitchen area. Kitchen area. You have, let's say, the balcony area and so on. So in each one of these areas, for example, in our case here, the kitchen, and this T here. So in the kitchen area, you can have, let's say, knives. So let's say you have knives. Let me use a different color. You have knives, right? And you could have, let's say, forks. So we are actually trying to list some of the things we see in these areas of the house. You could have, let's say, spoons, and probably pans and so on. So in that area of the house, you could have this kind of things listed. So let me pick them, move them here. So these are the things you could see around that area. So let me put them in these boxes like this. So now the other idea we could look at around these elements in our house, these things around our house, is that they have a location. So they have locations. So basically, you just not only they are in the kitchen, you can also pinpoint where exactly in the kitchen they are. So for example, for the knives, we can say they are on the knife hanger. Let's say we call it NH. Let's name it that way. Knife hanger. So some kind of thing you use to hang knives. So the same thing here. This one could have a knife hanger. So let's say perfect hanger. So let's make that one FH. So FH. Then you can also have spoons hanger. So we can make that one SH. And then for the pants, maybe you have a pants drawer, so we make it PG. So this is very important concept because not only you have the thing, but you also have where it is, the location of the thing. It is an important concept because if you want to send somebody or you are sending a child like go and bring me a fake, they know that okay, they are going to the fake hanger and bring it from for you. Go to the spoon's hanger and you bring a spoon for you. So this is a very interesting concept, and this is what actually we call arrays in JavaScript or in most in programming languages in general. So an array is actually an area that contains a certain number of things. And in JavaScript, we represent this by actually putting them in square brackets. So if it was, we just place these elements like this and put a square bracket, we are just trying to say, okay, this is an area which contains these things. So basically, in JavaScript, you would say this is an area of knives, It's an area of knives, right? So you write it this way: knives, then comma, fork, then comma, spoons, comma, pans. And like we said earlier, if you are to write a string of letters, or you are to symbolize strings, you put them in quotes. So it means we have to indicate like, yes, this is a string, this is a string, and this is a string, and so on. So basically that's how we represent what you call an array. It's just listing a certain things that exist in a particular context. So in our case, we use the context of the kitchen, and that's what makes us have that. This could be simply numbers. So let's say we have 0, we have 3, we have 4, and maybe 7. So this could be numbers. Or you could decide to say, okay, not only you have numbers, you could also have a number. You also have strings. So let's say person's name, right? And you can also have another number here again, and so on. So basically the concept of the arrays, like in the areas of our house, we cannot say this area contains only this type of things. So in the kitchen area, you don't always have to have knives. You can have many elements. But the most important thing is that they are grouped for some reason. So there's a reason, which is usually the common reason the things are grouped together. And then the other principle about the arrays is that they have locations. So every element in the area or the array requires a specific location so that we can easily pinpoint them. So in our example here, we give them names as area locations, but in JavaScript, instead of giving them names like this, we rather set numbers. So we could set this as the first element, and this one the second, or position 1, position 2, position 3, and position 4. So the same thing happens here: 1, 2, 3, and 4. But funny enough, in general, in programming, uh, the locations in arrays are set from 0. So automatically it counts from 0, 1, 2, 3. So for example, if you want to locate the element in this case, in this array's case, the element at position 1, this is going to be the 3 here. This is going to be the 3 here. So basically, that's how we set arrays. That's how you create arrays. And since arrays are just a set of elements, whenever we want to create an array, we'll go by the simple principle of creating variables in JavaScript. So if you want an array of these numbers, for example, let's say these numbers represent simply scores of 4 teams. So we could say let scores, which is the scores of each one of the teams. And this is the first reason of using arrays, which is grouping. The reason why we are actually creating the array, because we are grouping the scores of our teams or our players. So then we bring the square bracket, and then we bring the first score, the second score, the third score, and then the fourth score. So that's it. So you use the keyword let or var or const, like you said, then the name, and then the values in square brackets. So it's kind of listing a certain thing. It's listing things. So just like we said here, that have a common reason to be together, or common properties, or common behavior, or so on. And then we can now do what we call accessing the element. So if you want to access the element at position 3, so we are going to do scores or score. Then I should add s here. So scores, then you put the square bracket again, and then you indicate the position. So if we indicate position 3, for example, since we don't have the number 3 here, so that you don't get confused, so the element at position 3 is going to be 0. So let me use a different color. So 0, 1, no, this is a comma, 1, 2, 3. So the element at position 3 is going to be this element, number 7. So the same way we access it this way to display it, we can also access it this way and change it. So if I say the element at scores 3 should be equals to now 8, then I'm changing the value of this 7 into 8. So I'm modifying this value to 8. So this is that's the basic principle of using arrays. So in this case now, like our example we mentioned, the elements we mentioned are objects. There are various objects. A knife is an object, a fork is an object, a spoon is an object. So this brings us to the next concept in this lesson, which are the objects. So an object, and why do we care about the object? Right now, the only thing we cared about so far is just having them in the list. But we could go deeper and decide to study the various properties and behaviors of each one of these objects we have in the list. So properties. So if we take, let's say the knives, if we take the knives or a knife, we could study a certain number of properties on the knives. So let's say we could study the size. We just consider the size, we would say. We could consider its color, although they are usually silver. We can also study their weight. Let's make it W. So we can study their weight and so many other things. So it means basically if we were to consider these things every time we're talking about the list here, we would have to kind of have a square bracket, then mention the size, mention the color, mention the weight, and then do the same thing for the rest and do this and do this and do this and so on and do this for the next one. So we'll mention all these properties in the list. So these kind of things, this kind of aspect of talking about the object details, the object's properties, and so many other things around the object. It's like whenever you try to detail the object to kind of group and model the object's behavior and nature, and we speak about creating an object in the language you are using or the programming. So we speak of creating an object is actually the virtual nature of the object, the real object. So if you look at the size, so maybe you can add name here. So if you want, so this actually is like an identity of the real object. So that's what we call object in programming. So to create an object in JavaScript is quite simple. We do let or const as usual or var, then we give it a name. So let's say a spoon in our case. So we want an object of spoon. Then you do equals to. Then you bring the curly bracket. And then you bring the new property you want to emphasize on, let's say the name. And now you set the value to it, right? The name, and you set the value. So let's say we name it n spoons or whatever, np's. We just choose the name we want here. Then we go ahead to the next property of the object. Let's say the size. So size, and you do colon, and then you set the value. So in our case, if the value could be, let's say 15 centimeters or so, cm. Since it is a string, I put it in quotes. Then I can go ahead again and tackle another property, which is, for example, the color. And then I will put colon and then put the value, let's say silver. So silver. And then you close the whole thing with another curly bracket. So that's how we create objects. And like we said earlier, so objects is actually a model of real things, or as a model of something. An object is the model of something, and the model is basically looking at the various details that make up that object. So that's the concept of object. So now we have seen this object, and like I mentioned here, it means we could have an array of objects. So if you have, we take our example above, we could have an array of this. So if all this represents one object, so we could have the square bracket around it, then add comma, have another, the second object in the square, the curly bracket, add comma, have another object in the square bracket, and so, and then we can close, the curly bracket and close with the square bracket. So that will give us an array of objects. And this is why we usually introduce arrays and objects together, because there are two concepts that can be combined, and it is very useful. And before we move on to the next aspect, which is how do we actually make operations on these objects, I have to let you know that it is very important to have these concepts in programming, because they allow us to simulate real life situations. They allow us to simulate real life situations, and that's what data types and data structures are mostly for in programming languages. So JavaScript is not of any exception when it comes to that. So let's see now some of the operations we can take. So when you have something like an array, so I would say operations, we've seen that an array is of a way for us to list things. So what are some of the operations we can have in a list? Because if you have a list of things in your house, you could probably say, how do I actually add, reduce, remove, change their positions, and so on. It is very important. So the same thing happens when you have an array in a programming language. So what are some of the things we can do? We've seen already how we can access an element when it comes to an array. So we've seen how to access it. We said we just bring the name of the array, so the name, then we bring square bracket, and then the position we want to access the position, and that will give us the element as a result. So we could also use the same principle of having the name and then the position, and then change the value of the element into any value we want. So these are two basic ways of accessing the element in an array. So there are some other properties, the other functions that are very interesting. For example, if you have an array, let's take an example of 0, 1, 2 here. So we could decide that we want to add something in the array, but we want to add it at a specific location. So for example, can we add at the beginning of the array or at the end of the array? So by default, you use these functions. So you take the name of the array name, and then you do push. You do name.push. So by using the name.push function, and you push the value you want, so let's say 3 in this case, it is going to add the number 3 at the end of the array. So in the end, our array is going to look like this: 0, 1, 2, and 3. So that's what this will do. So the function push on the array will actually push whatever value we put here at the end of the array. So what if you want to actually push it or put the value at the beginning? So we do the same thing. We have a handy function for that. So we do name dot and shift and shift. So that's very interesting. The name is crazy. So unshift, and then we put the value we want to unshift. So let's say we put, let me put -1 in bracket. So this will change the value of our array into this -1. So let me change the color. This will give us -1, -1, 0, 2, and 3. So that means the number -1 will be placed at the beginning. So there are the other functions around this aspect. So I will look at the next operations, which are to remove. So the same thing, we can remove either at the beginning or at the end. These are common functions you will see when you are operating on arrays. So to remove from array, which is to remove at the end of the array, you use the name of the array and you use the function pop. So you use the function array pop, and there's no need to add anything in the parameters or the bracket. So this will actually remove the last element by default. So that will return our array into -1, 0, 2. So the next operation in a remover is to remove from the beginning. So in this case, we use the name of the array, then we do shift, and then you also just put in the bracket. So this will change the value of the array back to 0, 1, and 2. So these are some of the basic operations you might have to take when you are working with arrays. So I decided to use these basic functions because you can see there's some similarity in them, especially this area, right? So you see the push takes care of the end, the pop takes care of the end. So these are opposite ones. You have shift and unshift, which are also opposite. Funny enough, the shift is for the end and the unshift is for the beginning. So although I wish the unshift was like the beginning at the end, and then shift is for the beginning, but this is what it is. So you should learn these basic functions when you are operating on arrays. There are so many other functions like map, slice, reduce, and so on that you will learn around the arrays. But for now, with this, you should be okay to start doing whatever you want to do. So we can also have operations on objects earlier on. So with objects, how we learned how to access them. Object. So with objects, to access an object, we call the object name. In my case, I'll call it object obj, and then you use what we call the dot notation, and then you access the key. So remember, we said that object look like this: square bracket, curly brackets rather. So curly bracket. Then we have key, column value, key value, key value. So because of this concept, we could simply go ahead, bring the name of the object, put a dot, and then the key we want to access. So that will give us the value, this value here. So this will bring the value here. So it will return the value. So the same thing, if you want to modify, you go ahead, you bring the name of the object, and then you also access the key. But this time you did assign a value to it by using the key, the equals to sign, and whatever value you set here will be assigned to that key. So it means the next time you try to do this, it is going to bring you the value of 0 in this example. So just like we have methods on the arrays, objects too come with some methods we can use. So for example, we have the method to return all the keys and the method to return all the values. That's what I will actually mention for now. So we can do object.keys. So if you say object.keys, this will return, so, and this is very important, this will return an array. You see now why it is very important to study these two concepts together. It will return an array of all the keys. So it will be key 1, key 2, and key 3 if there are 3 keys in the object. You see, so you could also use array dot values, object dot values. So you do object dot values. So by doing that, it will also return an array of values. So an array of values. So I'll change the color. So we also have an array of the values. So this method can be very useful in many situations. So value 1, value 2, value 3 if any. And we go like this. So this can be very useful when you are operating with objects and arrays. So I hope this actually opens your eyes a little bit. Objects and arrays are a very dense subject in any programming languages, especially in JavaScript. So I didn't want it to look too heavy on you right now. I want it to look simple and very interesting to motivate you to actually study them. And when you study bit by bit, you assimilate bit by bit, it becomes fun to learn. So in our next lesson, we will have the chance to explore arrays and objects in a practical exercise, in a more practical project. So I hope to see you then. Like our video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with other people. Thank you so much, and see you in our next lesson.